Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. A new development, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal says it's extending its deadline for a process outlining how compensation funds would be distributed to the victims of the federal government's underfunding to child and family services.
The plan was for the Assembly of First Nations and the Child and Family Caring Society to meet with the Government of Canada to look at possible options. Those options were to be presented to the tribunal on December 10th. But the tribunal has expressed concerns those discussions have not taken place. It says Canada has potentially opted for non-compliance of the tribunal's order until the federal court has ruled on the motion. The tribunal has extended the deadline to January 29th, 2020.
Statistics Canada released new homicide figures today, and they're bleak, showing the number of Indigenous homicide victims remains 5 times higher than the Canadian average. The number of Indigenous men who died by homicide between 2014 and 2018 was double that of Indigenous women. The same stats show that the number of Indigenous women dying by homicide is on the rise. The number of male Indigenous victims was down by 23 people from 2017 stats, the first decrease since 2014 when data on Indigenous identity first became available. Also in the numbers, the rate of Indigenous people accused of homicide. According to Stats Can, 30% of people accused of homicide in 2018 were Indigenous people. Indigenous identity is reported by police and is determined through information provided by the accused person or by other means.
The BC government has just passed Bill 41, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, making that the first province in Canada to do so. Royal assent will be given tomorrow afternoon in the BC legislature, officially making it law. Merle Alexander is one of the lawyers who helped draft the document. He says the real work begins now.
The immediate priority, I think, for First Nations and the BC government is to develop an action plan. So that will be, like, as it sort of sounds like, what are the first priority areas that are open for legal reform? Like, what areas do we need to change in British Columbia that are priorities to make BC laws consistent with the UN Declaration? So that will be a very big deliberative process, but it'll also be very exciting because it's the beginning of a legal reform era, which we've never seen the likes of at any time, I think, in legal history in British Columbia.
The United States government is taking action to address the missing and murdered Indigenous women problem that exists south of the border. President Donald Trump has created a White House task force to be led by the U.S. Attorney General. The task force will develop protocols for new and old MMIW cases, both on and off reserve, and will establish a multi-jurisdictional team of investigators who can more easily share intelligence. Trump says statistics around violence against Indigenous women are, quote, sobering and heartbreaking.
The statistics are sobering and heartbreaking. Recently, more than 5,000 Native American women and girls were reported missing in a single year. While the majority return home or are found, too many are still missing and their whereabouts are unknown. And they usually don't find them. One study showed that Native American women in certain tribal communities are 10 times more likely to be murdered than the average American. The victims and their families deserve action, and this should have happened many years ago.
Inadequate, unconstitutional, and must be shut down. That's how 7 Ontario youth described Premier Doug Ford's 2018 Cap and Trade Cancellation Act. So they filed a lawsuit against the Ontario government, arguing that the bill weakens Ontario's 2030 climate targets and violates their charter rights. 3 of the applicants are from First Nations. Elena McDougall has the story.
Take climate action!
The passion of 7 Ontario youth was evident at Queen's Park, where a lawsuit has been filed on their behalf. They're suing the Ontario government for, in their words, weakening climate targets, a move that will lead to widespread illness and death, a violation of the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Among them, Shelby Gagnon, BZ Gray, and Shaylin Wabagishik.
We are the future. We are fighting for our lives and for generations yet to be born. We are all connected, We are all treaty people, and we must all heal together.
These young people come from different parts of Ontario, backed by lawyers from EcoJustice and Stockwoods LLP. They argue that Ontario's plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 30% below 2005 levels isn't enough. It falls far short of reducing emissions to half called for by the Paris Agreement.
Our youngest client is 12 years old. We have 11 years to fix this crisis, and if we don't, by the time she turns 23, it might already be too late. So we're really proud to be able to speak for them in court and to take Mr. Ford to court.
The legal team behind the youth's case are confident.
At the end of the day, we believe that the science is unassailable. There is a scientific consensus that's out there, and the Ford government wants to ignore science, but they won't be able to ignore the courts here, and they'll be held to account.
Shelby Gagnon is Anishinaabe from Thunder Bay. She echoes Wabagishik's concern for families.
And youth are the ones who are taking this action because it's our future and future generations. We need to look forward to them and take care of them because we're all related, we're all family, and we're all connected.
The Ontario case is part of a global effort to force governments to respond to climate emergency and is funded entirely by donations. Elena McDougall, APTN National News, Toronto.
Journalists for Human Rights held its annual gala in Toronto this week, celebrating human rights journalism around the world and honoring those who take risks and overcome obstacles to serve the public interest. 400 of Canada's top media executives and journalists gathered on Monday for the JHR's Night for Rights Gala and fundraiser. Proceeds go to journalists for human rights initiatives like the Indigenous Reporters Program. Jolene Banning came to APTN News through that internship. She spoke at the event in what has been described by some as a fierce call to increase Indigenous voices in Canadian media.
This is a cultural conditioning where the focus has always been based on our issues, with barely a nod to the colonial violence that we continue to endure, or the resiliency and ability to overcome and thrive as Indigenous people. We need to remember who we are, where we come from, and we need to be the ones to tell those stories.
Big night for Jolene. Congrats to her.
Yeah, no kidding.
Coming up, APTN has released a first-of-its-kind study on the impact of Indigenous music on the economy.
And we'll hear from some of those Indigenous musicians as well. But first, here's a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. On the East Coast, we've got 4 in rain in St. John's, 8 in rain in Halifax. Rain or snow in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, 1 degree. Kuujjuaq, -5. Quebec City, 2 degrees, mostly sunny skies. Montreal, rain and 5 degrees. Sarnia and London are 12 and rainy, as is Windsor, 1 in Sault Ste. Marie and snow. Kapuskasing and Timmins, -4 in snow. Wawa, -3 in snow. Norway House, snow. God's Lake, snow, -7 degrees there and in Thompson. -6s for Barons River and Princess Harbour. Mix of sun and cloud, -2 in Winnipeg. -4s for Regina and Swift Current. Mix of sun and cloud, -7 in North Battleford. -12 in sunshine for Stony Rapids. -8 and snow for La Ronge.
Welcome back. The Indigenous music industry is contributing to Canada's economy in a big way. A recent study published by APTN says the Indigenous music community contributed almost $78 million in 2018. The study, which is a first of its kind, provides a comprehensive look at the industry. Brittany Hobson has more.
Vince Fontaine is a veteran in the music industry. He spent the past 20 years touring and performing with his groups Eagle and Hawk and Indian City. Prior to this, Fontaine spent a decade playing shows in Winnipeg clubs. At that time, this was often the only way Indigenous musicians could play their music for a wider audience.
We didn't see a lot of artists recording. The recording industry was not something that we were able to do. Because the industry was different, there was, record companies were really, we thought, in a sense, out of reach.
This place the best of me, guess it wasn't good enough.
Now fast forward to today. where the Indigenous music industry is making a huge impact across the country. It contributed $78 million to Canada's economy in 2018, according to a new study APTN released this month.
That's something to be proud of, and something that we got to take note that as a body, body of people in an industry, it's something that we should have a continued strong voice and recognize that we're really making a contribution, and there's something significant about that.
The National Indigenous Music Impact Study is the first of its kind in Canada. The study found the industry supports more than 3,000 full-time positions across the country. On average, artists performed at 23 live events or shows over the last 12 months. More than a quarter of artists perform or record in an Indigenous language. Kelly Fraser is one of those. She is from Sanakiliwak, Nunavut. She got her start 6 years ago covering pop songs in Inuktitut. She has since released 2 albums, but pursuing her dream career required some tough decisions.
I had to move to the city to be able to try to attempt to become a full-time musician.
The study found where they live could be a major challenge for musicians from remote communities. Another barrier is lack of money and promotion. She has a Kickstarter campaign to market her newest album, Decolonize.
It's very expensive to create and publicize. This is not just to create my album. It's to publicize, to hire a very good team of people to promote it on the radio, to promote it through news publications, whereas places where I don't have access to, you have to hire other people.
Alan Greyeyes is the director of the Sakiwe Festival. He says Indigenous music organizations are also strapped for cash.
I think this study will go a long ways in helping organizations like ours, younger organizations, access the same support that our Canadian counterparts have.
The report suggests an Indigenous music organization could break down some of the barriers.
A national voice. We need somebody speaking to the CRTC. We need somebody speaking to Canadian Heritage, Canada Council. We need representation at all of those levels.
One thing is for sure, Indigenous voices in the music world will continue to be heard. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Riffing off that study, APTN in Focus today shone the spotlight on the Indigenous music industry. There's a lot to be excited about as it is, and they're just getting started. What's new? What's next? Here's what some of our musical guests had to say.
I like music. I grew up with hip-hop culture and reading The Source and XXL and all these, influential or culturally influential mediums, and I wanted to participate in that. And I thought, representation is super important, and music gives us one of those platforms that we can use to challenge stereotypes about Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. And so every stage, every album, every social media tweet, every time we step to that microphone, we have the opportunity to show Canadians and the rest of the world that we're individuals and that our voices matter. We have just as many possibilities and futures as their loved ones do.
Was there an Indigenous musical star that you looked up to growing up?
My mom.
Yeah?
My mom, yeah. My mom for sure. Buffy St. Marie's a big one too. I love Buffy
from
St.
listening
Marie.
to you, I suspected she'd be on the list.
Totally, and she's been such an inspiration to me over the years, and I feel like I was born in the wrong decade, I feel like
Really?
my music is reflective of a lot of the 60s and 70s sounds, and that's where she got her start. So
to pick up an instrument was losing at talent shows. I used to enter talent contests in like Pegwis and like different places. I'd always lose to somebody playing guitar, and I was like, I'm not gonna lose to them anymore. I'm gonna learn how to play. And then once I learned how to play, it became more about the art, and then like now it's turned into a career that I've been able to manage for the past 6-7 years.
As if Leonard Sumner was losing talent shows at any point.
Yeah, no kidding.
I can't. I'm not buying
for
it.
a lot of awards lately.
You can watch that episode of In Focus on our website, aptnnews.ca, or catch it on your TV tomorrow when it re-airs at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central.
And there was lots of good tunes in it. Still to come, just in time for the holidays, a look at Indigenous arts and crafts in Northern Ontario.
To northern Alberta, we got -10 and mostly sunny skies in Fort Chip. -10, mix of sun and cloud for Edmonton. -12 and snow for Calgary. 1 in sunshine in Penticton, Tofino, 7 degrees and sunny. -10 in sunshine for Smithers. -12 and sunny for Fort Nelson and Dease Lake. -11 in sunshine and with a little bit of cloud in Beaver Creek. -1 and sunny in Rock River. Wrigley, -12 and snow. -14 and snow in Norman Wells. -3 and snow in Nunavik, 0 and sunshine for Fort McPherson. -16 and snow for Baker Lake, and snowing in Repulse Bay, -18.
Welcome back. With the holiday shopping season underway, you may see Indigenous artists and crafters out selling their work. But what does it mean to buy Indigenous art or other goods? Who should buy it or wear it? Willow Fiddler went searching for some answers in Thunder Bay.
Local markets and craft fairs abound this time of year. In Thunder Bay, many of those artists and crafters are Indigenous, and they want your support.
I think that during the holiday season it's important, even more so because we should give gifts that are meaningful and that people will want to display in their homes for a long period of time. They'll cherish forever.
Sean Hedekin is a self-taught Anishinaabe artist. He wants consumers to consider local Indigenous artists when out looking for the perfect gift.
Especially if you're buying from, say, a tourist shop or whatnot. A lot of the pieces are inauthentic and lack meaning and are also completely manufactured overseas.
Louise Thomas is the owner of Anishinaabe Art Gallery in downtown Thunder Bay. She teamed up with a nearby business to host an Indigenous arts and crafts sale recently.
The Indigenous art scene is quite huge in our community, and I'm very, very proud that I can be a small part of it, having this gallery for Indigenous artists to display their works.
Hannah Dockstader-Wynn is no stranger to that scene. She learned the craft from her dad.
I would start going to these Christmas sales and arts and craft sales with him, and I began making my chokers, traditional chokers.
She says the craft is a way to reconnect with her ancestors.
Because me making the chokers, my dad was actually the one who taught me, and it was his great-grandpa who taught him, and they used to actually go on the powwow trail as a full-time thing.
To avoid cultural appropriation, these artists say buying from Indigenous artists or crafters is the best way to support and honor their cultures.
I think it's important because it's coming from like real Indigenous people with the knowledge and like the teachings behind what they're actually making, and it's handmade, and it's not like it's coming from a huge company or like industry.
Hedekin says not knowing where the product comes from can be harmful.
The danger is that you're contributing to the cultural genocide, but also that you're helping to render our culture meaningless when you buy things that lack the symbolism or the care and attention and the craftsmanship that goes into it.
Jean Marshall is an Anishinaabe crafter who quit her job to bead full-time from her home. She says she's often asked how long it took her to make something.
And that's never the question I'm thinking about when I make something.
I never think like, how long is this taking me? And I don't have a timing myself. But that's always the first question.
She says Indigenous-made products are often undervalued by consumers and even the artists themselves.
You may not understand how many hours actually went into the moccasins or the mitt or the beaver hat, or how long it took to tan that hide, or who went to trap the beaver. All of these details that are going into the item that you bought.
And once that item is bought, they want you to know it's okay to wear and display it.
But there are people who ask, they're like, oh, is it okay if I wear this? I'm not Indigenous. And I'm like, yeah, of course you can wear it. I think it's okay as long as you're supporting like the Indigenous artists who actually make it.
Yeah, I think it's important to support local Indigenous crafters because we're deadly. Just kidding.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
No, don't put that on there.
This is ever deadly. Manitoba is set to celebrate its 150th birthday next year. To help celebrate, the Nellie McClung Foundation, in conjunction with the Winnipeg Free Press and the Manitoba Museum, is looking for nominations for women in Manitoba who helped make this province what it is. The foundation is named after Nellie McClung, whose advocacy work led to women being allowed to vote. For more, the foundation's Doris May Olton chatted earlier with Dennis Ward.
Doris, thanks for being with us. Can you tell us a bit about the Trailblazer Awards and who would be eligible?
Absolutely. Basically, anyone who has lived in Manitoba or is living in Manitoba is eligible. What we want is we want to identify women who have made some impact on Manitoba and its development. Not suggesting that Manitoba and the development started when it was declared a province, but this territory and who made an impact, how did they make an impact, how were they really leaders in their field. And there are lots of women that should be nominated.
Yeah, I understand they will not be limited to time to the past 150 years of
That's right.
Manitoba as a province. So women who lived in this territory before it was given the name Manitoba are eligible, correct?
Absolutely. And we're on groups of women are also eligible. So for example, we could accept nominations for medicine women or warrior women or that kind of a grouping of women. They are eligible as well.
How many Trailblazers are you looking for, and when will we hear who's selected?
We're looking for 150, symbolically the 150th anniversary of Manitoba, so 150 women. And we're going to have, on May the 1st, we'll have an unveiling of those 150 women with their stories, and we're publishing a book that will have the stories in it. Now, as well, everyone who is nominated will also be in that book. So we'll have a complete list of all of the women that people have said are important to the development of Manitoba.
Well, Doris, sounds like a great project. Appreciate you taking some time to tell us about it.
And thank you for having us.
Looking forward to see who's all nominated for that list.
That would be a pretty impressive list of 150 Trailblazers, hey?
Plus all those who get nominated.
Yeah.
That's your APTN National News for this Friday. For the very latest, visit our website, aptnnews.ca.
That's also where you can find today's episode of In Focus on the Indigenous music scene. You can also catch it on APTN tomorrow here at 11 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 Eastern, 10 Central. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.